If you also happen to be a weird, existentially anxious ball of nerves and anxiety, you might share the same pastime as me. I'd recommend it, it's a fun one. It's the pastime where you go looking for horrifying existential truths about reality so you can sit in the dark and stare at your hands like this. If you'd like an introductory concept to get weirdly enamored with, I'd recommend the idea that physical reality doesn't exist. I know what you're thinking. What? But yeah, that's what we're talking about today. Hang on to your prefrontal cortex, because this one's gonna get weird. Okay, so there's two different ways that you can look at reality. There's the usual way, and then there's the way which makes me go, Let's start with the first way. The first way is what I call the physical paradigm. I've heard people call it materialism. And I don't mean materialism in the sense that you derive all your satisfaction in life from having a big house with a pile of shiny Pokemon cards inside of it. In the way I'm talking about it, materialism, or the physical paradigm, as I prefer to call it, is the idea that there's a physical universe. It literally physically exists. It doesn't depend on some observer looking at it. It doesn't care what your opinion is of it. It really exists. It's like the primary thing that exists. Like, if there's a pencil on your desk, it doesn't matter if you're looking at it, or if you're in another room, or if you're on another continent, or if you're in another galaxy. The pencil continues to exist. It's just as real regardless. It's objectively real. It's composed of matter, and the matter objectively exists. Now, before I go any further, based on the way I've started this, some of you might be expecting me to go in a quantum woo-woo direction with this. I'm not a quantum physicist, but to my knowledge, the idea that quantum mechanics has anything to do with consciousness is just people misunderstanding how quantum mechanics works. I don't think quantum physics has anything to do with consciousness, and that's not the direction I'm going with this. So, under the physical paradigm, there's a true way that the world actually is. Even if you're on an insane psychedelic trip or whatever, if you eat a handful of random forest mushrooms and now from your perspective the clouds have transformed into some insane Mastodon album cover and there's a giant deer head descending from the sky to eat you alive or something, as far as the physical paradigm cares, the reality of the situation is that nothing particularly crazy is going on. Your senses and brain chemistry are just misleading you about the reality of what's physically happening. Reality is stable, it's just your subjective perceptions are being fucked with by whatever chemicals are binding to the receptors in your brain or whatever. Your subjective perceptions have no bearing on the actual physicality of the real world, and the real physical world is what actually matters and what everything else emerges from, including obviously all the world's physical phenomena like matter and energy, but also consciousness. In the physical paradigm, conscious creatures just evolved from stardust and chemistry. They got more complex, they evolved like neurons and shit, and now they can think and experience stuff. And if you look around, I mean, everything can be explained by that model, right? Like, what doesn't that explain? Physics is just the bedrock of reality, and consciousness emerges from it as a second-order phenomenon, right? So, okay, that's the physical paradigm. That's cool. That's fair. But let's check out the alternative. The alternative is something which I think is usually known as idealism, but I prefer to call it the conscious paradigm, because it means there's some satisfying symmetry between these two ideas. So in the same way that under the physical paradigm there's this hard, objective, physical reality from which everything else emerges, under the conscious paradigm, consciousness is the hard, objective reality, and the physical world emerges from it. The two paradigms are exactly backwards from each other. Now this might be a bit confusing to conceptualize, so let me build this up in a few steps. You know about the physical world by looking around it, right? Seeing it, hearing it, feeling it, smelling it, tasting it. Everything you know and experience about reality is sensory information occurring within your consciousness. So you don't really experience physical reality. We say there's this solid, certain thing called the physical universe, but you literally never experience it. Not directly. You never make direct contact with physical reality. You just know what your senses tell you about it. Drake? Yeah? Where's the fabric of reality? It's right there, see? It's made of matter and energy and you can like look at it and whatever. I'm referring to what you actually know exists for a fact. Yeah, I'm telling you it's right there. Oh really? Yeah. So go interact with it. Okay, I will. If you're familiar with the Matrix movies, they're kind of a riff on this same idea because the major premise is that everyone unknowingly lives in a simulated reality. I'll be honest, I'm pretty sure I've only seen the first one, whatever, I know enough about pop culture to pretend I'm an expert. In the Matrix movies, machines take over the world and plug all of humanity into a giant computer, and their entire lives are pretty much hallucinated via sensor data received from the computer. Their brains are just given the stimuli of a life which they don't actually have, so they don't actually experience anything in physical reality. There's been loads of parodies on this same idea at this point, you know, like Rick and Morty episodes episodes and whatever, you can see how the premise works, and the basic premise more or less makes sense. You don't actually know what physical reality is like. You only know what you experience, and you presume that that indicates an underlying physical reality. You kind of hallucinate reality in the same way that you hallucinate what happens when you're absolutely tripping balls. The difference is that your everyday experience is consistent, so you assume that there's something real and physical underlying it. Like, look at the screen that this video is playing on, and then look away, and then look back at it. The screen is still there, the audio is still playing, things don't rearrange themselves when they're not being observed like they do in a dream. Everything reliably works, it's reliably predicted by the laws of physics, so we assume the existence of a hard physical world, and we call that physical reality. But the more you think about it, the more you realize it really is just kind of an assumption. I mean, take a simple question about it. What does physical reality look like? Well, looking like something is what it means for it to be perceived. But in this case, I'm asking what it objectively looks like. I'm not asking how some creature's arbitrarily configured sensory apparatus constructs its internal perceptual hallucination of it. I'm asking if the physical universe is the actual bedrock of reality, if it's real and solid and exists beyond mere perception, what qualities does it actually have? Because everything from the way matter looks or sounds or feels, to the distance between objects, to even the existence of space-time itself, are all just how we consciously perceive it. That's not how it actually is. The more I think about it, the more I think anything you can possibly imagine can't be how it actually is. So even if you believe in the physical paradigm, the physical universe is a lot more weird and vague and nebulous than most people seem to assume it is. Sorry to interrupt, this is just a quick message to say, statistically speaking, you're probably not subscribed, so I'll make you a deal. Press the subscribe button and I won't come over to your house and do this. Baba Booey. Alright, thanks, back to the video. This conscious paradigm that I'm talking about is basically the Matrix scenario, but taken to the maximum extreme. In the Matrix, the people are being lied to about the nature of the physical world. The physical world is totally different from their false perceptions of what they thought was the physical world, but there still was a physical world. An older version of this is Descartes' evil demon hypothesis, which is an idea that there could hypothetically be some powerful entity screwing with your perceptions to create an illusory reality. They're kind of the same thing, but Descartes was from the 1600s, which was before Ridge Racer even came out, so the analogy is a demon rather than a simulation. I kind of prefer the Matrix framing though, it's kind of easier to conceptualize I think, but in both cases you can say there's a real physical world, just that the conscious being in question is having their sensory data intercepted so they perceive a false, illusory reality rather than the actual reality. Like in the Matrix, they do get out of the machine simulation and walk around in the real world at some point. It was possible to unplug and experience reality. There was still some physical universe in which the conscious people were grounded. But what if it wasn't just that physical reality is different from what you think it is? What if there literally isn't a physical reality? Like in the same way that the physical paradigm thinks that the universe is the primary phenomenon and consciousness is a secondary phenomenon that occurs within it, what if it's the other way around? What if consciousness exists first and foremost, and the contents of consciousness occur in a way which you can conceptualize as a physical reality, but it's not actually physical. It's not actually a physical reality. It's all just sensations within consciousness. The idea would be that there is nothing physical that consciousness is grounded inside of. Consciousness just kind of floats on its own. Any physical reality that exists in any sense exists exclusively within consciousness, and not the other way around. That's the idea. Consciousness being the thing that grounds anything else you can think of. That's the conscious paradigm. But hold on, let me pull back for a sec. Why are we even discussing this? Isn't it obvious there's a physical reality? It seems pretty solid, at least on the surface. There's no reason to think physical reality is an illusion. Our perceptions are so structured, like surely the obvious conclusion is that there's a physical reality. Science and technology only work if there's an underlying physical reality with rules and shit, right? Isn't this conversation the kind of thing you'd expect from someone who dropped acid once and then made it their entire personality? Well, kinda. If you've watched any of my other stuff, you'll know I'm a bit of a pedantic asshole about being scientific and rational about things, but there's a reason why I'm talking about this. There's the obvious problem with the conscious paradigm, of there being seemingly an ordered universe despite the conscious paradigm saying that it's an illusion, which you would think implies that our perceptions could just be formless nonsense, so why would there appear to be solid, fixed objects and laws of physics and all that kind of shit? But here's the thing, there's also an issue with the physical paradigm. Not just that it's actually insanely nebulous if you really think about it, but there's another problem with it, which I would argue is at least as difficult to reconcile as the problem with the conscious paradigm, if not harder. The issue is literally called the hard problem of consciousness. In a nutshell, the problem is, how do you just take regular matter and make something out of it that's conscious? Like, just on a conceptual level, how does that work? Like, even if you aren't a mechanic, you can understand how a car works in principle, right? All an internal combustion engine is doing is taking fuel and oxygen, throwing a spark on them so they explode. The explosion pushes some mechanical bits and pieces around, which the mechanism turns into a spinning motion, and then you attach the spinning motion to the the wheels and the car wants to go forward. Complex to make one actually work, but the basic principle isn't that hard to grasp. Even a computer, which is ridiculously complex, but it largely reduces to some basic computing principles, like storing data in the form of binary, using that data to add and subtract and encode words and colors and images and 3D spaces, and then displaying all of that on a screen with pixels. Harder to grasp, but the average person can still more or less get there. Okay, but now say that we have all of the best neuroscientists and machine learning engineers and whatever in the entire world, and we have a machine that can build literally anything so long as we correctly tell it what to build. Regardless of what we need, even if the materials are super rare or whatever, it doesn't matter, the machine will just effortlessly build it, so long as we give it the right instructions. Okay, so how do you build a thing that's conscious? Like, walk me through that. How the fuck? Obviously there's no issue building something that's intelligent, even something that can imitate a human. You could totally build a biological organism that metabolizes and has a brain or whatever. We already have ChatGPT and Boston Dynamics robots and haunting Japanese sex androids, but like, how do you build something that's actually conscious? How do you even know that it's conscious? What does a physical system need in order to be conscious? Is it a level of computational complexity that it needs to get over? Is it a certain set of brain parts that are needed? How exactly does this work? There's a reason why it's called the hard problem of consciousness, and that's because we have frankly no goddamn idea how to solve this. We as in humanity, we honestly don't know. It seems almost impossible to solve in principle, I would say at least. There's a concept called a philosophical zombie. A philosophical zombie is something which essentially appears like a conscious creature when you look at it from the outside, but which doesn't actually have an internal experience of reality. It's like an NPC in a video game. It's just a flesh puppet on autopilot. The honest reality is that you have essentially no way of proving that artificial intelligences, animals, even other human beings aren't philosophical zombies. Literally, you could be the only conscious agent in the world and you would have no idea. Well, you have no way of proving it either way. I would go as far as to say, if you trust in the physical paradigm alone, I don't think you can even believe in consciousness, because the physical paradigm says everything is made out of matter, and consciousness itself, I think it clearly seems to not be made of matter, in my view. I think that's why the hard problem of consciousness is so hard, because on some level the question somehow doesn't really make sense. I'm not saying any spooky shit about it, but it's just clearly a different kind of phenomenon than the kind of stuff you can just build from atoms. Now, scientifically minded people sometimes get the wrong end of the stick when I say the kind of thing that I've just said. I'm not saying that brains don't exist, or that patterns of neuronal activity don't happen, or that they don't correlate completely with what we're experiencing. They do. They all do. That's all true. But what I'm trying to figure out is the experiential side of this. What is the experiential side of this coin made out of? Not the physical brain, the consciousness that the brain is somehow generating or correlating with. I'm asking about the consciousness itself. We can frame this as if we're looking for appearances within consciousness. So if I look at an apple and the apple is green, I'm experiencing green. I'm not lying about it, right? I really am. Let's say I really am looking at an apple and I'm experiencing the color green within my field of vision. Okay, so where is the green? Like physically, where is it located? Because the green isn't in the object itself. As we've discussed, reality only appears to us in our internal conscious perceptions, inside of our consciousness. The greenness only appears within my consciousness. That's what green is. It's a quality of the visual field within consciousness itself. I know there's photons with a wavelength that correspond to green in the physical world or whatever. That's not what I'm asking. I know that there's patterns of neuronal activity happening in my brain which correspond to me seeing green, but that's not what I'm asking about either. I'm asking about the sensation of green within consciousness. Where is that? Where is it located? If you cut open my brain while I'm looking at a green apple and you go looking for green inside of my brain, you will not find it. But the physical paradigm says that everything is physical, right? So to my mind, one of two things is true. Either the green actually exists in some meaningful way. In other words, your consciousness is real and the green is occurring inside of it, which means the physical paradigm must be false because consciousness itself is not actually composed of physical matter. Or the physical paradigm is true, which means that consciousness is just an illusion. That would mean that the conscious perception of the green apple literally doesn't exist. It means your consciousness, the only thing that you know for a fact actually exists, doesn't exist. What the hell does that mean? It means you're a philosophical zombie, and since you are just consciousness and the world is just appearances within your consciousness, that would mean your entire existence doesn't exist. Literally, your entire reality is just illusory somehow, and no actual conscious experience exists at all. It's all just null and void and abyss and nothingness, but somehow it looks like a whole reality is happening? I guess? seems kind of fruity and weird for a system of metaphysics whose main selling point seems to be how super rational and down to earth it's meant to be. Also, that's not even the worst bit. The worst bit is that if you commit to the physical paradigm, we're now saying that only physical reality exists, despite the fact that we only know about physical reality via this thing that we are now claiming is completely illusory and doesn't exist. So if you assume that physical reality exists and grounds everything else and you want to be rational, since there's technically no actual reason to think that that physical reality exists, you kind of just have to think that nothing exists. So, like, looking back, I think if we actually just assume that consciousness is the primary phenomenon, then the why is consciousness structured the way it is question is actually probably a vastly easier question to solve. Like, that's very hard still, but surely I feel like that question has straighter edges on it somehow, like it's easier to put in a box. If you just evaluate this rationally, I honestly think that framing has fewer problems with it, which is wild. Especially it's wild to think about because things like the moral and ethical rules that we put in place that we base all of society on are heavily impacted by fundamental epistemic and metaphysical questions, which we don't seem to understand whatsoever. Like, my ideal future would be humanity, I don't know, unifying behind some common purpose that we can work together on, and whatever it is, we kind of know that we're ought to be doing it. But that objective ought, that doing a thing that we know is good, if such a thing even exists, is downstream from these fundamental basic questions of how reality works, which we apparently don't understand at all. Now, listen, I've got plenty more thoughts on this subject and all the related areas, but I thought I'd just make this video as like a brain teaser, just to get you thinking. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave it there for now, and let you do whatever you want with this information. So thanks again for watching. Like and subscribe if you want. I've got a bunch of cool YouTube membership perks if you're interested in joining the channel. There's a couple of folks that have joined already, actually. Normally, the bottom tier doesn't entail a shout out at the end of the episode, but I just wanted to say cheers, guys. Like, it's insane to me that anyone has joined at all. That's rad as fuck as far as I'm concerned. So thanks a lot. As always, I'll catch you in the next one. Over and out.